At 5 in the morning, my phone buzzed beside the bed. The alarm from my downtown apartment had gone off. The security guard's voice trembled. "Mrs. Avery, your daughter-in-law is here. She says she's the new owner." I sat up slowly, watching the gray light crawl across the motel curtains. My pulse was calm, almost curious. I'd been waiting for this moment, for her to show her true face. So I smiled and said, "Let her in. She's in for a surprise." My name is Elaine Avery. I'm 69, a retired literature teacher from Austin, Texas. I used to teach about unreliable narrators, how people twist truth until even they can't tell what's real. Funny, isn't it, how life decides to make you the subject of your own lesson? I live alone now, in a quiet building near Lady Bird Lake. Mornings smell of coffee and cedar. I water my plants, talk to my cat, and read the paper out loud just to hear another voice in the room. Since my husband died, I've grown used to silence. It can be kind if you know how to listen. My son, Michael, visits less these days. His wife, Rebecca, says it's because he's busy building a future. She says that word future like it has no room for people with gray hair. When she hugs me, her perfume lingers too long, sweet, expensive, suffocating. Sometimes I feel dizzy after tea at her house. She insists it's just my age. That's when I began recording everything, little notes, receipts, times, faces. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe instinct. Either way, something deep inside whispered that love, when mixed with greed, can be the most dangerous fiction of all. That night, before the alarm went off, I was resting in a small motel outside of Austin. I had been there for 3 days, away from the apartment that carried too many shadows. I kept my laptop open on the desk, streaming every corner of my home through the hidden cameras. It had become a ritual. Chamomile tea, a spiral notebook, the faint hum of surveillance. At first I installed the cameras for my own peace of mind. But soon they became something else, a mirror reflecting the cracks in the story Rebecca was writing about me. Every clip, every sound told me she was building a case to declare me incompetent. I could almost hear her rehearsing in front of my son. "She forgets things, Michael. She leaves the stove on. She's not herself anymore." But I was myself. Maybe too much. I had kept every property in my name, every account clean. That kind of independence, I learned, offends those who crave control. The night before her visit, I noticed movement on the screen. Rebecca entering with 2 men, pointing, measuring. My name was still on the lease, but she walked as if it were already hers. I muted the volume and closed my eyes, counting my heartbeat. Not fear, preparation. When the alarm went off at dawn, it wasn't chaos I felt, it was clarity. The story she had written about me was about to collapse under the weight of its own lies. I told the guard to open the door and then reached for the small flash drive on my nightstand, the one labeled, "For Michael." Because some lessons, I thought, are meant to be learned the hard way. It's strange the way memory works. You think the mind keeps everything in neat order, but it doesn't. It stores moments like mismatched buttons in a drawer, some you reach for without knowing why. That morning, while the cameras showed Rebecca pacing through my living room, I remembered the first time she ever crossed my door. Michael had brought her for Sunday lunch. She was dazzling, hair so straight it looked painted, lipstick the color of ripe cherries. She carried a bouquet of tulips and a bottle of imported wine. Her voice was soft, almost rehearsed. "You have such a beautiful home, Mrs. Avery," she said, eyes moving over the framed photos on the walls. She paused at one, me and my late husband, dancing barefoot on the beach in Galveston. "You must miss him," she whispered. I did, but something in her tone made it sound like a test, not sympathy. From that day, small things began to shift. Michael's visits shortened. When he came, he repeated the same gentle warnings. "Mom, maybe you should think about moving to a smaller place. Rebecca worries about you being alone. Rebecca worries about you." That phrase became a mantra. It showed up in text messages, in birthday cards, even on a sticky note she left by the fridge. I started to see her handwriting everywhere, like graffiti marking territory. The first real fracture happened the day she brought me tea. Lemon balm and chamomile, she said, for sleep. The cup steamed in her hands like a little fog. After a few sips, the room tilted. My head felt stuffed with cotton. I tried to stand, but my legs refused. Rebecca's smile was wide, almost kind. Don't fight it, Elaine. You need rest. When I woke hours later, the cup was gone, and so was she. But my jewelry box had been moved. My husband's ring, his wedding band, was missing. I called Michael, furious. He said I must have misplaced it. Mom, please, you're tired. Rebecca didn't touch anything. The word tired echoed like a verdict. That night, I sat by the window, staring at the street lights and the endless Texas horizon. For the first time, I doubted my own memory. Could I have imagined it? Could grief really twist perception so much? The next morning, I searched the kitchen trash and found the teabag wrapper. It wasn't lemon balm or chamomile. It was something else. I couldn't pronounce the name, but when I looked it up online, the words chilled me. Mild sedative, causes dizziness and short-term confusion in older adults. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I simply began to write everything down. Dates, times, symptoms. I logged it like a scientist observing a rare, venomous creature. From then on, I smiled more during our encounters, asked for seconds of her tea, played the part she wanted. If she saw me as fragile, I would become porcelain, delicate, untouchable, watching her reflection in every polished surface. Because somewhere inside, I knew this wasn't just manipulation. It was rehearsal. And when people rehearse that hard, it's because they're preparing for an audience and a final act. The audience, as it turned out, was my own son. Rebecca understood that her power would mean nothing without Michael's belief. So she began to sculpt him, carefully, tenderly, using my supposed confusion as her clay. She started with little lies, the kind you can't easily disprove. Your mom called me twice today and told me the same story, she'd say, laughing softly, as if worried for me. Or, she left the front door unlocked again, honey. I think we should get her checked, just to be safe. I didn't know what she said behind my back until much later, but I could feel it in my son's eyes. They were gentle but cautious, like someone studying a beloved relative through a hospital window. He began taking small decisions for me, canceling appointments, managing bills, just to help. I tried to resist, but every protest was another piece of evidence in her case. See? She's paranoid. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from not being believed. It's not the isolation of an empty room. It's the ache of speaking into silence, of watching truth slide off someone's ears like rain on glass. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry, Rebecca appeared with a smile so bright it hurt to look at. Elaine, I've been thinking, she said, setting a folder on the table. Michael and I want to help with your paperwork, make things simpler for you. These legal forms would protect you if anything ever happened. Protect me. That was the phrase she used, her voice honeyed with concern. I flipped through the papers and recognized my own address, my bank's name, power of attorney. I looked at her and said calmly, I'll read it later. That night, I called Otis, a lawyer I'd known since my husband's company days. His wife, Marla, was a close friend. I told him what was happening, how I feared I was being drugged, manipulated, erased. He didn't dismiss me. Instead, he said something I'll never forget. Elaine, don't confront her yet. Quietly build your case. Protect your mind first, your evidence second. So I did. I stopped drinking anything Rebecca offered. I kept one of her special tea bags sealed in a small envelope. I even pretended to lose my memory once, just to see her reaction. Her eyes glittered, triumphant, as she whispered, It's okay. You're safe with us. In that moment, I realized she wasn't just cruel. She was convinced she deserved my life. Within a week, I had hidden a camera behind the living room clock, another in the hallway smoke detector, and one inside the bookshelf near my desk. I felt half detective, half ghost. Watching her move through my home when I wasn't there was like watching someone rehearse your own funeral speech. The footage started showing patterns. Rebecca taking photos of documents, opening drawers, making calls from my landline. Every act was small, but together they formed a map of intent. Still, the hardest part wasn't gathering proof. It was pretending to be blind while the person you once called family rehearsed your disappearance in broad daylight. And that was when the first seed of my counterattack took root, not in anger, but in a quiet, razor-edged resolve. Because if Rebecca wanted a performance, I would give her one. Only this time, I'd be the writer, director, and witness all at once. I began my performance the following week. Everything had to appear effortless, accidental. I started mixing my days, forgetting small things, pretending to misplace keys or repeat stories. It wasn't easy. Humiliation never is. But it was necessary. The more harmless I seemed, the bolder Rebecca became. One afternoon she brought groceries and fussed around my kitchen like a benevolent angel. "You really shouldn't live alone, Elaine," she said, her voice coated with concern. "You could fall, forget the stove. Anything could happen." I smiled. "You're probably right," I answered, stirring sugar into my coffee. My sugar, the one she hadn't touched. It was a strange sensation, watching her pity me while I was the only one truly awake in that room. Each kind smile of hers was a thread tightening around her own trap. That night, I sat in bed, watching the recorded footage. She'd lingered in my bedroom longer than usual, opening my dresser, flipping through my checkbook. Then, like a magician revealing a final flourish, she poured something from a small vial into the sugar bowl. I paused the video, zoomed in on her hand, clear as daylight. My breath caught, but not from fear, from victory. By morning, I was at Otis's office with the footage saved on a flash drive. He looked at the screen in silence, jaw tightening. "She's overconfident," he finally said. "Good. That'll make her sloppy. We'll let her think she's winning." He suggested a psychological evaluation to preempt any claim of dementia. I booked it the same day. The doctor, a soft-spoken man with kind eyes, gave me a clean bill of cognitive health and signed it with a firm stroke. I almost cried when I held the document. It felt like reclaiming my name. Back home, Rebecca kept playing her part. She started whispering to Michael on the phone within earshot, using that falsely gentle tone. "She's not doing well, honey. You'll see." I'm worried. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Silence became my armor. Instead, I began preparing my apartment as if for a play. Every angle covered by a camera, every piece of evidence labeled and stored. I learned to time my reactions. Slow blinks, delayed answers, just enough to feed her illusion. Then came the moment that sealed her fate. One evening, she arrived with a realtor. I watched from the hallway as she walked the man through my apartment. "The owner's retiring to Florida," she lied smoothly. "I'm handling the sale." They didn't know the camera hidden in the bookshelf was streaming everything live to my laptop. After they left, I called Otis. "It's time," I said. We planned the next move. She'd try again soon, and when she did, we'd be ready. That night, sitting by the window, I thought about how easily love turns into strategy. My heart still ached for my son, for the way he'd been folded into her story. But I couldn't save him without first saving myself. As the Texas night wrapped around the city, I whispered into the dark, "Let her believe she's winning a little longer." The cameras blinked red in response, silent witnesses to a war fought in whispers. Rebecca didn't take long to make her next move. Manipulators rarely do. They thrive on momentum. Within a few days, she showed up unannounced, her arms full of shopping bags, her smile rehearsed. "I bought you new bed sheets," she said, dropping them on the couch. "The ones you have are too old. We'll redecorate a bit. It'll cheer you up." I thanked her, pretending not to notice the way she scanned the room, looking for signs of weakness. My gaze drifted to the sugar bowl again, pristine and untouched since I'd replaced it. It sat on the counter like a loaded gun. Later that evening, after she left, I reviewed the footage. Every word, every glance, recorded in crisp clarity. There she was, taking pictures of my jewelry drawer, whispering into her phone. She won't remember a thing, just a few more weeks. My hands shook, but not from fear. The pieces were finally aligning. Otis came by the next morning. He was an old friend of my late husband, the kind of man who measured his words like gold. "You've done everything right," he said, sliding a folder across my table. Inside were copies of every document, time-stamped and notarized. "If she pushes, she'll bury herself." "Good," I said. "I want her to push." That same afternoon, my son called. His voice carried that uneasy mix of guilt and denial. "Mom, Rebecca told me you've been recording things. That's not healthy. She's worried you're becoming obsessed." The sting of betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. I took a slow breath. "Michael, darling," I said softly, "do you remember when you were little and I told you stories about wolves dressed as sheep?" He sighed. "Mom, please." "Just remember the story, sweetheart," I whispered and hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. The apartment felt heavy, as if it knew something was coming. I sat by the window, the city lights trembling in the distance, and thought about the line between justice and revenge. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted freedom. But sometimes, the road to one looks exactly like the other. Around midnight, the motion alert from my cameras pinged. Rebecca had returned, alone this time. She crept through the front door, using her own copy of the key, one I never gave her. She opened drawers, took photos, made a call. I turned the volume up just as she whispered, "By the end of the month, it's all mine." The words were ice in my veins. By dawn, Otis and I had everything we needed. The evidence was undeniable. He promised to deliver copies to the police if she ever crossed the final line, and I knew, deep down, that she would. People like Rebecca always do. They mistake mercy for weakness. So I waited, patiently, quietly, like a hunter who's learned the rhythm of her prey. And when the rhythm broke, at 5 a.m, I'd already been awake. The day before everything unraveled, the air itself felt heavier, as if the house knew it was about to exhale after holding its breath for too long. I woke before sunrise and brewed coffee without sugar out of habit and defiance. Outside, Austin was quiet, the kind of stillness that comes just before a storm rearranges the sky. Rebecca called around noon, her tone clipped but cheerful. "Elaine, could I stop by tomorrow? Just to check on a few things. Michael's been worried." I almost laughed. Tomorrow. She thought she was orchestrating her final act. Little did she know, the stage was already rigged. That afternoon, Otis came over again. He brought with him a small team, a tech assistant, a paralegal, and a quiet woman named Grace, who handled digital evidence. They tested every camera, synchronized every timestamp, double-checked that each file was backed up to cloud storage. "Elaine," Otis said, resting a hand on mine, "this might be hard to watch. She's going to come believing she's already won. Let her." I nodded. "I've been letting her for months." He gave a faint smile. "You're stronger than most people half your age." After they left, I packed a small bag, my laptop, my medications, my late husband's watch, and that flash drive labeled "For Michael." I locked the apartment and drove to a motel near the outskirts of the city. The room smelled faintly of bleach and cigarette smoke. The curtains didn't quite meet in the middle, leaving a slit of sunlight on the carpet. That night, I watched the live feed one last time. Rebecca's voice drifted faintly through the speakers, soft, deceptive. She was telling Michael over the phone that she'd handle everything, that his mother would be safe soon. Safe. The word rang hollow, like the echo of a locked door. Around midnight, I wrote a letter to my son. I told him about the ring, the sedative in the sugar, the lawyer, the cameras. I told him I loved him, but love could not excuse blindness. "One day," I wrote, "you'll see this tape. When you do, understand that I never lost my mind. I simply refused to lose my name." I sealed the envelope and placed it inside my purse. At 4:57 a.m., my phone vibrated on the nightstand. The security system had triggered, motion detected, living room. I opened the app. The cameras flickered, then focused. Rebecca was there, wearing jeans and a white blouse, her hair tied back neatly. 2 men followed her, carrying boxes and plastic bins. She moved with certainty, as if entering her own home. She was speaking on the phone again. I turned up the volume. "Yes, everything's ready," she said. "The lawyer will file the incompetence papers next week. She won't even know." A cold calm washed over me. When the guard called to confirm the alarm, his voice trembled. "Mrs. Avery, your daughter-in-law's here. She says she's the new owner." And I smiled, just as I had planned. "Let her in," I said. "She's in for a surprise." Because by the time the sun rose over Austin, she wouldn't just be stepping into my apartment. She'd be walking straight into her own confession. When I think of that morning now, what I remember most isn't fear. It's precision. Everything unfolded like the lines of a poem I'd already memorized. Rebecca entered my apartment at 5:03 a.m. The cameras caught her from 6 angles: living room, hallway, kitchen, bedroom, and 2 hidden microphones. The first thing she did was turn off the lights and open the blinds halfway, as if she needed daylight to legitimize her theft. Her voice carried clearly through the feed. "Start with the boxes," she told the movers. "We'll take the furniture first. The documents can wait." Her phone was still pressed to her ear. "Yes, Michael. I'll call you later. She's not home yet. I told the building I'm the new owner." She laughed softly, like she was performing for herself. I watched from the motel bed, my hands steady around the coffee cup. Otis's assistant sat beside me, monitoring the recording. Grace, the paralegal, was already on the phone with the police, her tone sharp and measured. We didn't move. We didn't need to. The truth was busy confessing itself. On screen, Rebecca opened the drawer of my writing desk. She found the folder labeled Medical Records and began rifling through it. I zoomed in. The camera caught everything, even the glint of satisfaction in her eyes. Then she picked up the phone again. "Everything's ready. She's probably still asleep," she said. "I'll finish before she knows." But she didn't notice that one of the movers was filming on his own phone, bragging to a friend on a live stream. Every sound, every word, was duplicated in the cloud before she even realized it. Otis had called the police 20 minutes earlier, warning them that an attempted property theft was in progress. They were already on their way. I remember checking my watch, 5:22 a.m., and whispering, "Almost." The camera in the living room caught her next move. She poured herself coffee from my machine, then reached for the sugar bowl. She paused, frowned, and said aloud, "Where's the sweet stuff?" It was almost funny. She didn't realize the evidence she'd planted had been replaced, tested, and sealed. A knock at the door startled her. "Who's that?" she hissed to the movers. "Police," came the voice from the hall. Her face changed. Confusion first, then panic. The men froze. She stammered something about a misunderstanding, but the officers stepped inside, calm and deliberate. They asked her name, her relation to the property, her reason for being there. Her answers tangled into lies within seconds. At the motel, I felt something inside me unclench. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even triumph. It was the release of months of held breath. Otis's assistant handed me the phone. "They're taking her in," he said quietly. I nodded. "Good. Let her explain herself to someone who isn't old enough to doubt me." By the time the sun rose over Austin, the footage was already in police custody. Rebecca sat in the back of the squad car, staring straight ahead. The movers gave statements. And I, after months of silence, finally spoke out loud to the empty motel room. "You can steal a man's attention, a son's loyalty, even his trust," I said softly. "But you can't steal the truth. Not when an old woman decides to write it down." The hours that followed moved in slow motion, as if time itself needed to be sure the nightmare was truly ending. I drove back to my apartment just after sunrise, the pale light spilling over the downtown skyline. When I arrived, 2 police cars still idled by the curb, their lights muted, casting red reflections across the marble entrance. Inside, the air smelled like dust and perfume. Rebecca's perfume, the one that used to cling to my sweaters after her visits. I stepped over the threshold carefully, as though the floor might still remember her lies. The officers greeted me with quiet respect. "Mrs. Avery, everything's been documented. She's at the station now," one said. I nodded, scanning the familiar walls. My bookshelves were half emptied, drawers open, photo frames turned face down. It looked like a scene from a burglary, and in a way, it was. Only this theft had been emotional long before it became physical. Otis arrived minutes later. He carried his ever-present notebook, eyes sharp but kind. They found everything, Elaine. The files, the recordings, even the vial she used for the sugar. It's over. But I wasn't ready to breathe yet. What about Michael? I asked. He hesitated. He's on his way. He asked to see you. When my son finally walked in, he looked smaller than I remembered, eyes red, voice unsteady. Mom, he whispered. I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I wanted to believe him. I did. But believing felt like walking barefoot over glass. You didn't want to know, I said quietly. That's different. He dropped his gaze, shame painting his face in streaks of silence. She told me you were sick. She said you were losing things. You thought it was easier to trust her version, I finished. He nodded, tears breaking free. I wanted to reach out, but something in me was still trembling, still cautious. Trust, once fractured, doesn't rebuild overnight. Otis placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Elaine, she's being charged with attempted fraud, drugging, and illegal entry. You don't have to see her again. I turned toward the window, watching the city wake below. People rushing to work, the first buses rolling by, unaware that a woman's freedom had just been restored one floor above. Michael sat beside me, tentative. What happens now? I looked at him, the boy who once brought me dandelions from the yard, who used to cry when thunder scared him. Now, I said softly, we learn to listen again, to each other, to the truth. He nodded, wiping his face. I'm so sorry, Mom. Sorry isn't enough, I whispered. But it's a start. When the officers left and Otis closed the door behind them, the apartment fell into silence. The kind that used to frighten me now felt sacred. I walked through each room, touching the walls, the chairs, the table, claiming them again, not as possessions, but as proof that I was still here. In the corner, my cat meowed softly, brushing against my leg as if to say welcome back. And for the first time in months, I smiled without rehearsing it. The next few days blurred together. Court paperwork, police reports, quiet conversations with lawyers. My apartment smelled of disinfectant and stale air, as if it too needed time to recover. I slept with the lights on for a while. Not because I was afraid, but because darkness had been her weapon, and I refused to surrender to it anymore. Rebecca's arrest made local news. Young woman accused of defrauding elderly widow, the headline read. The words felt surreal, detached, like they belonged to someone else's life. People whispered about how calm I looked on camera when I gave my statement. But calm isn't the same as peace. It's what's left when you've used up every other emotion. Michael stayed close. He called daily, brought groceries, fixed things that didn't need fixing. I could see the guilt in every gesture. One afternoon, I found him sitting on the balcony, staring at the skyline. Mom, he said, how did you know? When did you start realizing something was wrong? I joined him, the breeze carrying the smell of rain from the hills. When she started treating me like a ghost, I answered. That's how you recognize cruelty. It makes you disappear before it ever touches you. He nodded, tears gathering, but never falling. We sat in silence for a long time. The city hummed below, life moving forward as if nothing extraordinary had happened. That evening, Otis called. Elaine, the lab confirmed it. Benzodiazepine traces in the sugar, matching her fingerprints on the vial. It's airtight. I thanked him and hung up. Relief came, but it wasn't soft. It was sharp, like a breath taken after too long underwater. Later, alone in the living room, I played back a clip from the night she was arrested. The screen showed Rebecca's face as the officers asked their questions. For a second, I thought I saw the same fear that once lived in me, the terror of being found out. But hers wasn't regret, it was rage interrupted. I paused the video and looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the TV. The woman staring back wasn't the same teacher who once worried about lesson plans and poetry anthologies. She was someone who had learned the vocabulary of survival, the quiet kind, written in the margins of trust and age. My son came in, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Chamomile?" he asked. I smiled, accepting it. "Only if you promise not to poison me." He laughed, the sound fragile but real. "Never again, Mom. Never again." We drank in silence, the steam rising between us like a fragile truce. When he left for the night, I stood by the window and watched the city lights shimmer against the river. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Someone else's alarm, someone else's story beginning. For me, though, the danger had finally ended. The war inside my own home was over. And as the clock ticked past midnight, I realized that survival isn't just staying alive, it's choosing every single day to still be the author of your own name. 2 weeks later, the trial began. I'd never been inside a courtroom before. The echo of footsteps, the sterile hum of air conditioning, even the heavy wooden benches, all of it felt too formal for the kind of betrayal we were about to dissect. Yet when I walked through those doors, chin lifted, I realized this was no longer just about Rebecca or even me. It was about the way the world looks at women who age, as if fragility and foolishness were synonyms. Rebecca sat at the defendant's table, her hair pulled back tight, her face bare of makeup. She looked smaller, almost ordinary. For a moment, I saw the woman my son had fallen for, clever, ambitious, radiant. But when our eyes met, I saw the truth underneath. Entitlement dressed as charm. Otis leaned toward me and whispered, "Stay calm. Let the evidence speak." And it did. They played the footage in front of everyone. The cameras I had hidden, the audio recordings, even the video of her pouring from the vial. The courtroom fell silent except for the brittle sound of Rebecca's breath. Her lawyer tried to argue stress, misunderstanding, manipulation, but the facts were too clean, too sharp to bend. When the clip of her phone call played, her voice saying, "She won't even know. By next week, it's all mine." Michael flinched in his seat behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The prosecutor laid out every piece with surgical precision, the sedatives, the fraudulent documents, the attempted sale. Each fact was another thread cut from the web she had spun so carefully. By the time it was my turn to speak, my hands trembled, but not from fear. I stood and faced the judge. "People think losing your mind is something that happens quietly," I said. "But it doesn't. It happens when people you love tell your story for you. I refuse to let mine be rewritten." Rebecca didn't look at me. She stared at the table, eyes cold and dry. The judge's verdict came faster than anyone expected. Guilty on all counts. 8 years. No parole before 5. When the gavel struck, the sound was softer than I imagined, but its echo filled every hollow space inside me. Michael reached for my hand. "I don't know how to make this right," he whispered. "You can start," I said, "by remembering who I am, not who she told you I was." Outside, reporters waited, cameras flashing. Someone asked, "Mrs. Avery, what do you want people to take from this?" I paused, looking at the morning light spilling across the courthouse steps. "That growing old doesn't mean disappearing," I said. "Some of us just get quieter while we sharpen our claws." I walked away before they could ask another question. The world finally felt wide again. Dangerous, yes, but mine. The courthouse steps were still warm beneath my shoes when I realized how exhausted I was, not just from the trial, but from the long performance of pretending I wasn't afraid. Freedom, it turned out, could be as heavy as fear. Michael offered to drive me home. On the ride, neither of us spoke much. The highway stretched like a silver ribbon under the Texas sun. I watched the landscape pass by, open fields, rusted fences, the occasional cluster of bluebonnets that had survived the summer heat. Everything looked the same, yet somehow I wasn't the same woman seeing it. When we reached the apartment building, he parked and turned off the engine. "I'll stay with you tonight," he said quietly. I shook my head. "You have your life, Michael. Go live it. I just need quiet." He hesitated, then kissed my cheek and left. Watching him walk away, I felt the ache of both loss and forgiveness, a mother's paradox. Inside, the apartment had been cleaned, repaired, restored. New locks, new paint, even a new sugar bowl on the counter. I ran my fingers over its porcelain edge and smiled. "Never again," I whispered. The cat brushed against my leg, meowing for attention. I lifted her into my arms, burying my face in her fur. The simple, steady warmth of her heartbeat grounded me in a way nothing else could. That night, I opened the windows wide. The city hummed below, a gentle human noise, distant laughter, the whoosh of cars, a siren fading somewhere far away. For months those sounds had felt threatening. Now they sounded like proof that life goes on. I brewed a single cup of chamomile tea, this time from my own hands, and sat by the window watching the lights ripple across Lady Bird Lake. For the first time, the reflection staring back at me in the glass didn't look like a woman hiding. It looked like a survivor rediscovering her edges. My phone buzzed with messages from friends, neighbors, even former students who had seen the news. "Proud of you. You inspire me. You give us courage." I didn't reply. Not yet. Some victories require silence before celebration. As midnight neared, I opened my notebook, the same one where I'd first logged Rebecca's every deceit, and began writing again. Not evidence this time, but memories. The smell of cedar after rain, the sound of my husband's laugh, the soft murmur of my son saying goodnight when he was small. Pieces of myself I refused to let anyone rewrite. When the clock struck 12, I closed the notebook and whispered, "I'm still here." The city lights blinked in agreement. The weeks that followed were a slow return to something like ordinary life, though ordinary no longer meant what it used to. My routines came back in fragments. I started each morning the same way, opening the blinds, feeding the cat, brewing coffee that smelled like promise instead of anxiety. Neighbors began stopping me in the hallway, offering cautious smiles. "You're brave," one woman said, squeezing my hand. "I'd have gone crazy." I smiled back but said nothing. They didn't understand that bravery isn't loud. Sometimes it's just surviving long enough to be believed. Michael came by often. At first, his visits were drenched in guilt. He'd bring flowers, groceries, or a new lamp I didn't need. But over time, the gestures softened. We began talking about smaller things again: weather, music, the neighbor's noisy dog. He'd tell me about work, and I'd listen without resentment. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the road that led there. One evening, he found me sorting through old photographs. "You're smiling in everyone," he said quietly. "Did Dad make you laugh that much?" "All the time," I said. He had a way of finding light even in dark corners. I looked up at him and added, "You have that same gift, Michael. Don't lose it." He blinked fast, like someone holding back tears. "You still believe that? After everything?" "Belief isn't erased by betrayal," I said. "It just becomes more careful." Outside, the sun sank into the horizon, turning the sky a bruised gold. I walked onto the balcony, letting the warm air brush my face. The city was alive again. Sirens, laughter, the distant strum of a guitar. Life doesn't stop for anyone's tragedy. That realization used to sting. Now it felt merciful. After dinner, I opened my laptop and rewatched the final clip from the trial. Not Rebecca's face, just the moment the judge read the verdict, the silence afterward. That silence was mine now, a full stop at the end of a sentence I had fought to reclaim. I closed the screen and whispered to the empty room, "You thought I'd fade." The wind through the open window carried the faint scent of rain. My cat jumped onto my lap, purring softly, anchoring me back to the present. I stroked her fur and thought of all the women who had written to me, those who had seen their own faces in mine. Widows, mothers, daughters, all saying the same thing in different ways. "Thank you for reminding me I'm not crazy. I'm just not invisible." That, I realized, was the truest ending. Not the punishment, not the vindication, but the echo that reached someone else's quiet morning and whispered, "You're still in control of your story." The storm had passed, but I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was alive, with purpose, with scars, with voice. Autumn arrived in Austin like a soft apology. Cool mornings, quiet parks, the faint smell of pecan trees in the wind. I'd always loved this season, the way it slows everything down, the way the world seems to breathe differently. After the trial, I found myself craving stillness, craving life stripped of noise and deceit. I started walking by the lake again. At first, only a few blocks before I tired, but soon the rhythm of my steps became a kind of meditation. The water reflected the changing leaves like glass, and sometimes I'd see my own face there. Older, yes, but also freer. One morning, I stopped at the cafe where I used to grade essays years ago. The same waitress was there, though her hair was streaked with silver now. "It's been a while, Mrs. Avery," she said with a warm smile. "Good to see you out again." "Good to be seen," I replied, and I meant it. I sat by the window with a book of poetry I hadn't touched in years. Mary Oliver, the one my husband used to read aloud on Sunday mornings. A line caught my eye. "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" I smiled, tracing the words with my finger. I didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time, I wanted one. That afternoon, I began clearing my apartment, not out of bitterness, but renewal. Old papers, clothes, photographs that carried too much weight. I packed what mattered into small boxes and left the rest behind. It wasn't erasing the past, it was making space for what might come next. Michael stopped by that evening. "You're really letting go of a lot," he said, lifting one of the boxes. "Letting go isn't the same as losing," I told him. "Sometimes it's how we make room to live again." He smiled, tired but sincere. "I think Dad would be proud of you." The words hit me like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Maybe," I said softly. "But I think he'd tell me to stop surviving and start living." After he left, I opened my journal again. No lists, no evidence this time, just reflections, small fragments of poetry, moments that reminded me that even pain can bloom into something beautiful if you give it time. As night fell, I brewed tea, black, strong, no sugar, and stepped onto the balcony. The city lights shimmered below like a constellation of second chances. Somewhere far away, a siren wailed, faint and harmless. For months, I had lived with cameras, alarms, and the constant fear of being watched. Now, for the first time, I stood there unobserved, unguarded, unafraid. And in that quiet, I finally understood what freedom felt like. Not an absence of danger, but the return of trust. By the time winter settled over Austin, I had learned how to live without flinching. The city dressed itself in soft gray mornings and early sunsets, and I found comfort in the simplicity of those shorter days. My world had become smaller, quieter, but infinitely more honest. Michael still visited on weekends. We no longer spoke about Rebecca. There was nothing left to say, but we found new ways to exist around the silence she'd left behind. Sometimes we cooked together. Sometimes we just watched old movies, laughing at the same scenes we used to when he was a boy. Trust, I discovered, doesn't return with words. It grows back through shared time, through the quiet repetition of showing up. One evening, as we decorated a small Christmas tree in the corner of the living room, he asked, "Do you ever miss how things used to be?" I looked at the twinkling lights, their reflections dancing across the window. "No," I said softly. "I think I just miss who I was before I stopped protecting myself." He nodded, understanding more than I expected. When he left that night, I sat alone by the tree, watching the shadows of the branches flicker on the walls. For the first time, the solitude didn't sting. It felt earned. In the weeks that followed, letters began to arrive. Emails, handwritten notes, messages from women across the country who had seen my story in the news or heard whispers of it online. Some were daughters of aging parents. Others were elderly women themselves, quietly confessing that they too had been made to doubt their own memories. "You gave me courage to trust myself again," one letter said. I read them all, one by one, and something inside me, something long dormant, stirred awake. I began replying to them, slowly at first, then with growing certainty. My words were simple. "You are not alone. Keep records. believe your instincts, and never apologize for knowing the truth. Soon, a local women's organization reached out, asking if I'd share my story in person. I hesitated, unsure if I could bear reliving it aloud. But when I stood before that small audience in a community center one Saturday afternoon, something shifted. The faces staring back at me weren't strangers. They were mirrors. I told them the truth, that I had been silenced, doubted, and nearly erased, but I had survived. And survival, I said, wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new one. When the applause came, it wasn't loud. It was warm, steady, human. That night, walking home under the pale winter sky, I whispered into the cold air, "I'm still here. And this time, I'm not just watching, I'm speaking." Spring returned like forgiveness. Slow, hesitant, but real. The air in Austin smelled of rain and blooming crepe myrtles. By then, months had passed since the trial, yet the echoes of it lingered in subtle ways. In the polite smiles of neighbors, in the curious glances of strangers who recognized my face, in the weight of my own reflection each morning. I had become something I never meant to be. A symbol. People wanted advice, reassurance, proof that justice could exist, even for those society too often dismisses. And though part of me still ached from what was taken, another part had begun to heal through the act of being seen. The organization invited me again, this time to speak at a university about aging, autonomy, and truth. Standing on that stage beneath the warm lights, I looked at the sea of young faces, so certain that betrayal was something that happened to other people. I smiled gently before saying, "Evil doesn't always wear a stranger's face. Sometimes it sits across from you at dinner and asks how your day was." The room went quiet, the kind of silence that holds breath. I told them about gaslighting, about doubt, about how easy it is to lose yourself when those you love start editing your story. But I also told them about resilience, about how wisdom and age aren't weakness, they're armor. Afterward, students lined up to hug me, to thank me. One girl whispered, "You sound like my grandmother. She'd be proud of you." I smiled through the sting of tears. Then maybe I did something right. Back home, the sun was dipping behind the skyline. I sat by the window with a new notebook, the first blank page staring up at me like an open horizon. I didn't know yet what I'd fill it with. Maybe stories, maybe lessons. But for once, the future didn't frighten me. I brewed tea, let it steep, and added no sugar. My cat jumped onto the table, curling beside the warm cup. Outside, thunder rolled softly over the city, a reminder that storms always return, but so does morning. As I took my first sip, I whispered to the quiet room, "You tried to rewrite me, but I'm still the author." The air felt lighter after that, like a door opening, like the final line of a long, hard chapter finding its period at last. And somewhere inside, I could almost hear my husband's voice, low and steady. "Well done, Elaine. You turned the truth into something no one can steal again." The spring light stretched long and golden across my apartment floor the morning I realized it was truly over. Not just the trial, not even the recovery, but the constant flinch, the quiet instinct to doubt my own senses. I had survived the kind of betrayal that strips a person of her reflection. And yet, somehow, I had found my way back to myself. Every morning now begins the same way. The hiss of the kettle, the hum of the city waking beyond my window, the soft purring of my cat as she circles my ankles. I pour tea, take it black, and watch the sunlight crawl across the pages of whatever book I'm reading. Sometimes it's poetry, sometimes it's law, sometimes it's nothing but a blank journal waiting for the day's thoughts to land. Michael visits often. Our bond isn't what it once was. It's quieter, steadier, real. He doesn't bring flowers anymore. He brings conversation, patience, and that hesitant smile that reminds me of the little boy who once believed I could fix anything. We don't speak of Rebecca. We don't need to. Some stories are finished, and leaving them buried is its own mercy. I've learned that healing doesn't arrive like a miracle. It comes in fragments, through laughter that doesn't ache, through silence that no longer feels like punishment. It comes when you make peace with the idea that not all wounds demand to be visible. Some are meant to stay as gentle reminders that you endured. I walk more these days, by the river where the water reflects the skyline. The same streets that once felt haunted now feel like home again. People nod when they recognize me, sometimes with pity, sometimes with respect, but I don't need their approval anymore. I have my truth, and that's enough. I no longer record everything. I no longer check over my shoulder. The cameras have been taken down, but their presence lingers in a different way, in how I see people, how I listen, how I trust. Not blindly this time, but with clarity. Every so often, I'm invited to speak, to tell my story again to women who think they're alone in their doubt. I tell them what I learned the hardest way possible, that aging doesn't mean surrendering your story, that intuition is not paranoia, that silence, when chosen, can be a roar. When I finish, they often cry, and I always tell them the same thing I tell myself every morning: you are still the author. Because that's what this all was. Not a tragedy, but a rewriting. If you had told me a year ago that I would find peace again, I would have laughed. But peace came, soft and stubborn, like a sunrise you don't expect but can't look away from. It came because I chose to keep living, to keep writing, to keep believing that my voice still mattered. And as the seasons turn once more, I know this much is true. Love may betray, memory may. If this story touched you, leave me a comment telling me where you're listening from, and a like so it can reach someone who might need it. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, and now, stay with me. The next story is waiting on your screen, and the journey continues there.